There are two things that need to happen with your first quilt. You need to enjoy making it, and you need to be proud of what you've made. If the whole time you're quilting it, you're feeling lost and confused, maybe so frustrated and overwhelmed that you totally give up, you're not going to make another quilt. If you do finish it, but it looks like something that's going to sit in a drawer and that you're only going to show to your very best bestie to prove to her that you are not crafty, you're not going to make another quilt. You want to feel good as you make it and also want to show it off to your friends. The first step to that first quilt that is one of many quilts is to pick a pattern that is appropriate for a first quilt. I have 5 red flags to watch out for, plus 1 bonus tip that I use for every quilt, plus a free pattern to download that is perfect for making your first quilt. When you're choosing a pattern, what you're choosing is this kind of design. What is on the front of the quilt? The pattern will tell you how to cut your fabric into pieces and how to sew them together so that you have a design with the fabric on the front of your quilt. But this is not a quilt, it's just a quilt top. To turn it into a quilt, you need to quilt layers together with batting in between and then also put a binding around the edge. Most quilters already know how to do this, so this part's not included in a pattern. In the pattern that I have to download in the links below, I do have links in that pattern to videos here on YouTube that explain how to do those extra steps. And knowing that there are extra steps after this makes you realize that you probably want to have a super simple pattern that you're going to piece together so that you still have some energy to do the extra steps of quilting and binding, right? Picking a pattern for your first quilt is just like picking what cake you're going to make the very first time you've ever baked. You want to start with something like a simple chocolate cake, not a 5-tier wedding cake. But if you've never quilted before, you might not know what those things are that turn a simple chocolate cake into a 5-tier wedding cake in the quilting world. Here are those 5 red flags. Just like a big wedding cake requires more time and ingredients than a simple 1-layer chocolate cake, a bigger quilt requires more time. It requires more cutting, more sewing, and more quilting and more binding. Plus, that quilting the quilt part is really hard on your regular machine if you've got a really big quilt. But even things like learning how to use a rotary cutter, learning how to have an accurate 1/4-inch seam are just extra complications when you have to do them more on a bigger project. It's just going to be more fun if you start with a smaller quilt. I always suggest a table runner, but certainly nothing bigger than a baby quilt. Next, some quilts just have lots and lots of tiny pieces, and all those pieces just mean more cutting and more sewing and more places and opportunities for things just not to line up, leading to more frustration. Try to find a pattern that has fewer bigger pieces rather than more smaller pieces. It's just like not deciding to cover your first cake with little tiny precise flower rosettes. You also want to avoid weird shapes. Mostly that means avoiding triangles. Triangles are tricky, squares and rectangles are not. There are things called half square triangles or HSTs in quilting that look like this. They're basically a square, it's just been divided on the diagonal into 2 triangles. In most quilt patterns, the process for making these is pretty simple and it's been designed to eliminate the problems with triangles, but still it's another thing to learn, so try to avoid them if you can. Any triangles at all, stick with squares and rectangles. Again, you're going for the simple chocolate cake, not the fancy tower of choux pastry with spun sugar down the top. There are also special techniques like applique and paper piecing that are really fun techniques to learn in quilting. Applique looks like this. You take little pieces of fabric and sew them onto another piece of fabric. Paper piecing looks like this, and it has special techniques that you would need to learn. There will be applique and paper pieced patterns that say beginner on them. Don't be fooled, that means beginner applique and beginner paper piecing, not first quilt. We're making a 1-layer cake, not a jelly roll that you have to learn how to roll and unroll without it all cracking. Next, let's be real, fabric is like chocolate. When you're standing in front of the Godiva case with a million different choices, it's really hard to choose. Likewise, it can be really overwhelming to stand in the fabric aisle of the store and know which fabrics to pick. You have to consider what each fabric will look like cut into pieces, where those pieces are going to go in the quilt, and how all those patterns and colors are going to interact over the whole quilt. It's a lot. There are 2 tactics you can use to reduce some of that overwhelm. First, you can use a pattern that specifies that it's pre-cut friendly. Pre-cuts are things like 5-inch squares or 2.5-inch strips. Pre-cuts come in sets like this that are already all coordinated by the manufacturer so that it will all look nice in your quilt. It's kind of like buying one of those pre-packaged Godiva boxes. The other option is to just pick a pattern that only uses a few fabrics. That means you'll have less to choose and less to keep track of as you're sewing. I actually like to recommend this for beginner quilters because it gets you used to picking out fabrics early in your quilting journey. At some point, you're going to make a quilt that's not going to take pre-cuts and you're going to need to pick out fabrics. Plus, wouldn't you really rather have a box of chocolates that only has your favorites in it instead of some of those weird cream-filled ones that you don't even know what they are? So those are the 5 red flags: a really big quilt, one with lots and lots of pieces, one with weird shapes other than squares and rectangles, one that has special techniques in it, or one that uses lots and lots of fabrics that you have to choose. The bonus tip is something I still think about with every quilt I make, and that is whether it has a deadline. Remember those 2 things that needed to happen with your first quilt? You have to enjoy the process and you have to be proud of it when you're done. If the point was just to have a quilt as soon as possible, you should just go to Target. If you don't need that first quilt done by a certain time, you'll be able to sit back and enjoy the process. Plus, you'll feel free to take the time to really understand what you're doing, and that means you'll end up with something that you're proud of when you're done. And as promised, I have the free pattern in the links below that you can download. It's free, it's a super simple table runner, and it's perfect for a first quilt. If you've baked before, meaning you are a fairly confident sewer, you know how to sew a straight seam with accurate seam allowances, you've used a rotary cutter before, you are comfortable with picking out fabrics in the fabric store, then this pattern is all you need. In it, as you can see, there are links to videos on YouTube here that explain those things like quilting and binding that usually aren't in patterns. If you're a new baker, meaning you are a newer sewer and you're just learning how to sew straight seams, maybe learning how to use a rotary cutter, also try downloading the pattern and read it through. In the email that comes with the download link, there'll be some other links to things like what tools you need to have when you're making your first quilt and how to sew straight seams. You can check out those links as well and see how you feel about making that pattern. If you'd like to feel super comfy as you're making your first quilt, check out my online course. It uses this pattern with lots of detailed tutorials on things like sewing a straight, accurate 1/4-inch seam, how to use a rotary cutter, and how to navigate the fabric store and pick fabrics. It gets you started with the knowledge that you will need to make your next quilts with confidence. Because remember, it's all about happy sewing.